I-18F, recently had to give up my inheritance from my grandfather to my older brother, Nate, 25M, because my parents insisted he needed it more. This whole situation has left me feeling betrayed and angry, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. My grandfather passed away last year, leaving behind a substantial estate. In his will, he specified that his assets should be divided equally among his grandchildren. I was set to receive $10,000 and a vintage car that I had always admired. Nate, on the other hand, was supposed to get $10,000 and our grandfather's old pocket watch. The problem started when Nate announced that he wanted to start his own business, a food truck specializing in gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. He claimed he needed more capital to get it off the ground, and that's when my parents stepped in. They told me that I should give Nate my share of the inheritance because he had a real plan for the future, while I was just going to waste it on college expenses. I tried to argue that college wasn't a waste and that I needed the money too, but they wouldn't listen. My mom even went as far as to say that since I had good grades, I could easily get scholarships, so I didn't really need the inheritance. It was clear that they favored Nate and his ambitions over my education. What makes this situation even more frustrating is the history between Nate and me. Growing up, he was always the golden child in our family. He could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, while I was constantly criticized for every little thing. Nate took advantage of this dynamic and often bullied me, knowing that our parents would always take his side. I remember one incident when I was 14 and Nate was 21. He had come home from college for the summer and brought some of his friends with him. They decided it would be funny to lock me in the shed in our backyard during a heat wave. I was trapped in there for hours, scared and dehydrated, while they laughed about it. When I finally managed to get out and told our parents, they brushed it off as a harmless prank and told me to stop being so sensitive. This pattern of behavior continued throughout our childhood and teenage years. Nate would constantly put me down, steal my belongings, and even sabotage my friendships by spreading rumors about me at school. Our parents never intervened, always making excuses for his behavior or blaming me for provoking him somehow. So, when they demanded that I give up my inheritance to Nate, it felt like the final straw. I initially refused, but then my dad threatened to cut me off completely if I didn't comply. He said he wouldn't pay for my college or support me in any way if I didn't help Nate out. Feeling cornered and afraid of losing my chance at education, I reluctantly agreed. The day I signed over my inheritance to Nate was one of the worst days of my life. I watched as he grinned smugly, knowing he had once again gotten his way at my expense. Our parents praised him for his entrepreneurial spirit while barely acknowledging my sacrifice. A week after Nate received my share of the inheritance, he threw a launch party for his food truck business. I wasn't invited, of course, but he made sure to send me plenty of photos from the event. The messages accompanying the pictures were full of backhanded comments like, "Thanks for your contribution, sis. Couldn't have done it without you. And too bad you missed out on all the fun. Maybe next time." His taunting messages pushed me over the edge. I knew I had to do something to get back at him, to make him face consequences for once in his life. That's when I remembered a secret Nate had been keeping from our family for years. When Nate was in college, he got involved with some shady characters and ended up participating in a credit card fraud scheme. He managed to avoid getting caught, but I knew about it because I overheard him panicking on the phone with one of his accomplices a few years ago. He had sworn me to secrecy, threatening to make my life even more miserable if I ever told anyone. Now, armed with this information, I'm considering exposing Nate's past criminal activities to our parents and potentially the authorities. I know it could ruin his new business and possibly land him in legal trouble, but a part of me feels like he deserves it after years of tormenting me and taking advantage of our parents' favoritism. Am I wrong for wanting to reveal Nate's secret and potentially ruin his business as revenge for being forced to give up my inheritance? I'm torn between feeling justified in my anger and worried that I might be taking things too far. Update 1: It's been 2 weeks since my original post, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone who took the time to respond and offer advice. After much consideration, I decided to go through with my plan to expose Nate's secret, but things didn't quite unfold as I expected. I started by anonymously tipping off my parents about Nate's involvement in the credit card fraud scheme. I created a fake email account and sent them a detailed message explaining what I knew, including dates and names of some of the people Nate had worked with. I also suggested they look into his old bank statements and social media activity from that time for proof. At first, nothing seemed to happen. My parents didn't mention receiving any email, and Nate was still going about his business as usual. I began to think that maybe they had dismissed the information as a prank or that their blind faith in Nate was so strong that they refused to believe it. However, about a week after I sent the email, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere at home. My parents were unusually quiet and tense, and Nate started spending more time locked away in his room. I overheard hushed arguments coming from my parents' bedroom late at night, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Things came to a head 3 days ago when my parents finally confronted Nate. I wasn't supposed to be home, but I had returned early from a friend's house and overheard the entire confrontation from my room. My dad was yelling, demanding to know if the accusations were true. Nate tried to deny it at first, but as my parents presented more evidence they had uncovered, his lies began to unravel. I listened as Nate finally broke down and admitted to everything. He explained how he had gotten involved with the wrong crowd in college and how the scheme had started small but quickly spiraled out of control. He claimed he had only participated for a few months before realizing how dangerous it was and cutting ties with the group. What surprised me most was my parents' reaction. Instead of the unwavering support Nate usually received, they were furious. My mom was crying, saying she couldn't believe he would do something so reckless and illegal. My dad was more angry than I'd ever heard him, telling Nate that he had betrayed their trust and put the entire family at risk. The argument went on for hours, with Nate pleading for forgiveness and my parents cycling through stages of anger, disappointment, and disbelief. At one point, my dad brought up the food truck business, asking Nate if he had used any of the fraudulently obtained money to fund it. Nate swore he hadn't, that all of that was in the past, but my parents seemed skeptical. As the night wore on, I heard my parents discussing what to do next. They were torn between reporting Nate to the authorities and trying to handle it within the family. They worried about the legal consequences for Nate but also feared that staying silent might implicate them if the truth ever came out. The next morning, an uncomfortable silence hung over the house. Nate stayed in his room, only emerging to use the bathroom. My parents looked exhausted and conflicted. When they saw me, they tried to act normal, but I could tell something had shifted in their perception of our family dynamic. Later that day, my mom pulled me aside and asked if I knew anything about Nate's past activities. I played dumb, pretending to be shocked by the revelation. She hugged me tightly, apologizing for not being more attentive to both of us over the years. It was the first time in a long time that I felt truly seen by her. As for the food truck business, it's currently in limbo. My parents have frozen the accounts associated with it until they can be sure none of the startup money came from illegal sources. Nate is devastated, but for once, our parents aren't rushing to fix things for him. I'm still processing everything that's happened. On one hand, I feel a sense of vindication seeing Nate finally face consequences for his actions. On the other hand, I'm grappling with guilt over the pain this has caused my family. I'm also worried about what might happen if Nate ever figures out that I was the one who exposed his secret. For now, I'm keeping a low profile and focusing on my upcoming move to college. I'm relieved that my parents haven't mentioned rescinding their offer to help with my tuition, especially now that Nate's business is on hold. I'll update again if anything significant happens, but for now, I'm trying to navigate this new, tense family dynamic one day at a time. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and the situation with my family has taken some unexpected turns. I'm currently writing this from my dorm room at college, where I moved in last week, earlier than planned due to the tensions at home. After the initial confrontation about Nate's past, my parents spent several days in a state of shock and indecision. They consulted with a lawyer friend of theirs to understand the potential legal ramifications if Nate's involvement in the credit card fraud were to come to light. The lawyer advised them that while the statute of limitations might protect Nate from criminal charges, there could still be civil liabilities if any of the victims came forward. This information seemed to push my parents towards trying to handle the situation privately. They told Nate that in order to avoid potentially ruining his future, they would help him make amends, but with strict conditions. First, they insisted that he sell the food truck and use the money to start paying back what he had stolen, even if the victims were unaware. They also demanded that he seek counseling to address the issues that led him to make such poor decisions in the first place. Nate, realizing the gravity of the situation, agreed to their terms. He seemed genuinely remorseful, which was a new look for him. Over the next couple of weeks, he worked on selling the food truck and all the equipment. It was a difficult process, and he ended up taking a significant loss on the investment. During this time, I noticed a marked change in how my parents treated both of us. They became more attentive to me, asking about my plans for college and showing interest in my life in a way they never had before. With Nate, they were noticeably cooler, watching him with wary eyes as if they were seeing him for the first time. About 2 weeks ago, just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal, another bombshell dropped. Nate's ex-girlfriend, Melissa, showed up at our house unannounced. I was in the living room when she arrived, and I'll never forget the look of panic on Nate's face when he saw her. Melissa was furious. She revealed that she had recently discovered fraudulent charges on her credit card statement dating back to when she and Nate were together. She had done some digging and figured out that Nate must have been behind it. She threatened to go to the police if Nate didn't confess and pay her back immediately. Our parents, who were home at the time, overheard everything. They were shocked to learn that Nate's crimes extended to stealing from his own girlfriend. This revelation seemed to be the final straw for them. My dad, in a rare moment of putting his foot down with Nate, told him that he needed to confess everything to Melissa and work out a repayment plan with her. Nate, cornered and out of options, broke down and admitted to everything. He told Melissa about his involvement in the larger fraud scheme and how he had used her information as part of it. Melissa was devastated, alternating between crying and yelling at Nate for betraying her trust. In the end, my parents stepped in to mediate. They helped Nate and Melissa work out a repayment agreement, with my parents guaranteeing the payments to ensure Melissa would be fully compensated. In exchange, Melissa agreed not to press charges, though she made it clear that her relationship with Nate was over for good. This whole ordeal seemed to finally break through Nate's sense of entitlement. For the first time in his life, he was facing real consequences for his actions. He's been uncharacteristically quiet and withdrawn, spending most of his time working odd jobs to start paying back the money he owes. As for me, watching all of this unfold has been surreal. I feel a mix of vindication and sadness. While I'm glad Nate is finally facing consequences, seeing my family in such turmoil is harder than I expected. My parents, especially my mom, have been reaching out to me more, apologizing for years of overlooking Nate's behavior and my feelings. I decided to move into my dorm early to give myself some space from the family drama. My parents supported this decision, even helping me move in and making sure I had everything I needed. It feels strange to suddenly have their attention and support after years of being in Nate's shadow. I'm focusing on starting my college journey now, trying to put this chapter of family drama behind me. I still haven't told anyone that I was the one who initially exposed Nate's secret, and I plan to keep it that way. As I settle into my new life at college, I'm hopeful that this fresh start will allow me to build a future free from the shadow of my family's past mistakes. Update 3. It's been about 2 months since I started college, and I wanted to provide one final update on the situation with my family. A lot has changed, and I feel like I'm finally starting to move past the drama and focus on my own life. Nate's repayment process has been ongoing. He's been working multiple jobs to pay back Melissa and contribute to the fund our parents set up to repay his victims from the credit card scheme. It's been a humbling experience for him, and I've noticed a significant change in his attitude. He's quieter, more introspective, and seems to be genuinely trying to make amends for his past actions. My parents have also undergone a transformation. They've been attending family therapy sessions, both with and without Nate, to work through the issues that led to their enabling behavior. They've reached out to me several times to apologize for the years of favoritism and neglect. While it doesn't erase the past, I appreciate their efforts to make things right. As for me, I'm thriving in college. Being away from home has given me the space I needed to process everything that happened and start focusing on my own goals and aspirations. I've made new friends, joined some clubs, and I'm enjoying my classes. It feels liberating to be in an environment where I'm not constantly compared to Nate or overlooked. Last week, I received an unexpected call from my grandfather's lawyer. It turns out that there was a clause in the will that none of us knew about. My grandfather had stipulated that if any of his grandchildren were found to have engaged in criminal activity, their inheritance would be redistributed to the other grandchildren. Given Nate's confession, the lawyer informed me that I would be receiving Nate's share of the inheritance in addition to my original portion. I was stunned by this news. Part of me felt a sense of justice, like my grandfather had somehow known to protect me from beyond the grave. But another part of me felt conflicted, knowing that this would likely create more tension within the family. When I told my parents about this development, their reaction surprised me. Instead of defending Nate or trying to convince me to share the inheritance with him, they supported my right to keep it. They said that Nate's actions had consequences, and this was one of them. Nate, when he found out, was understandably upset. But to his credit, he didn't lash out or try to guilt me into sharing. He acknowledged that he had brought this on himself and said he hoped I would use the money wisely. I've decided to use the inheritance to pay for my college tuition and set aside the rest for graduate school or future investments. It feels empowering to have this financial security, especially knowing that I won't have to rely on my parents or worry about student loans. As I reflect on everything that's happened over the past few months, I realize that exposing Nate's secret had far-reaching consequences that I couldn't have anticipated. While it led to a period of intense family turmoil, it also sparked necessary changes and brought long-buried issues to light. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of my relationship with my family. We're all learning to communicate better and respect each other's boundaries. I'm not sure if Nate and I will ever have a close sibling relationship, but we're at least on civil terms now. For now, I'm focusing on my studies and embracing the opportunities that college offers. I'm grateful for the chance to forge my own path and create a life that isn't defined by my family's past mistakes. Whatever the future holds, I feel better equipped to face it on my own terms.